Another territory that's going to come under European control in the modern era is Africa. And within a very short amount of time, the entire continent, with two exceptions, is going to be controlled by European powers. And so it started relatively small. Early explorers began to map out parts of Africa that they previously couldn't get to. And this was made possible by steamships, which could now navigate the rivers easier than sailing vessels. Also, new medicines, for example, quinine, which helps prevent malaria, allowed Europeans to travel to the interior parts of Africa. And so early explorers began to kind of map out this territory. Then missionaries followed. Missionaries like David Livingstone explored Central Africa, trying to find good missionary spots. And so it begins small, and gradually Europe begins to play a bigger and bigger role in the interior parts of Africa. The building of the Suez Canal is going to change things as well, because Britain wanted to protect their investment in the Suez Canal. Plus, the Suez Canal becomes so important to travel between Europe and Asia. And so after rebellions break out in Egypt, Britain steps in, and Egypt basically becomes a British protectorate as they send in the army to enforce order and stability because they wanted to protect their interests in the Suez Canal. So I'm going to start by looking at South Africa because it was a bit different than the other parts of Africa. First off, it's one of the few parts of Africa that in the previous era had already undergone European colonization. The Dutch had established a colony in South Africa in the previous era because it was a good halfway point between Europe and Asia. And so their Dutch ships could stop over in South Africa before continuing on to Asia. And gradually, more and more Dutch began to settle in South Africa. They became known as the Afrikaners or the Boers, which just means farmers. And they established plantations there. They enslaved the native population and used them as laborers on these huge plantations. And then during this era, Britain is going to take over South Africa. And when they take over, more and more British begin to settle in that region, and Britain is going to abolish slavery. Well, this upset the Boers who depended on slavery on these plantations. And so with the outlawing of slavery and with more and more British settling in South Africa, the Boers are going to push in to the interior parts of South Africa. And they're going to claim new lands. And as they do, it's going to bring them into conflict with the Bantu peoples. One of the main groups of resistance were the Zulu. The Zulu were well organized and fought against the Boers. But gradually, the Dutch are able to establish several new states in the interior parts of South Africa. They're going to establish Orange Free State and Transvaal. And so the Dutch kind of continued to rule these territories, but then diamonds are discovered in that territory. And so as diamonds are discovered, well, British entrepreneurs began to flood into the area looking for diamonds. And with the discovery of diamonds and later gold, British began to push into these newly established Boer colonies. And so this is going to lead to the outbreak of the Boer Wars. And the Boer War was a conflict between the British and the Dutch. And ultimately, Britain wins, and they're going to unite all of that territory into the Union of South Africa. The Berlin Conference was a meeting between European powers basically to establish the rules for claiming territory in Africa. And basically the only rule was you had to claim a territory and announce it to the rest of these European powers, show that you had control of it, over it, and it was yours. And so within a very short amount of time, within 2 decades, all of Europe is going to be carved up between different European powers. And the only exception was Ethiopia, who's able to keep its independence. They hold off the Italians, and they remain kind of a Christian kingdom in Africa. And then Liberia, who was kind of associated with the United States, almost like a U.S. protectorate. But those are the only 2 regions that kept their independence from European rule. And so if you look at the map, you can see at the beginning of this era, all of Africa, with the exception of Egypt, which was a British protectorate, and South Africa, which was a Dutch colony, was still independent. And then within, again, 2 decades or so, almost the entire continent would be claimed by European powers.